It's been said that everybody's got a story to tell. Well, the person we're about to meet tonight, there's no group of people in America more prepared to argue their constitutional rights.
That's how we connect to each
Yeah.
other. That's how we connect to our communities. And that's what we tried to do here
Yes.
at the cafe.
And it's my pleasure to welcome Tamara Tami Payne to our broadcast here this afternoon. Tami, welcome to Hampton University. You know, your dad has been down here, your brother Jamal was down here, and now it's a trifecta. We have you. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you.
It is so great to have you. And this is not a book. This is an accomplishment. I dream of getting 200, maybe 230 pages in hardcover. But you have cracked the ceiling, the 600-page ceiling. It is so fantastic. You must be on like a rocket ship.
The goal was really to make sure that the dad's book got published and our work was put out there, and that was the point of why we were working on it for so long. So to not have it out there that would be a failure.
Well, yes. I wouldn't say failure. That's such a harsh word. But no, you can't do that much work and just walk away from it. Yeah, but it is a great accomplishment. I'm so happy for you, proud of you, and is just a wonderful exclamation point on a very important project. This is the first time I think, it's Alex Haley with his autobiography, but through the years there's been all of these things, and this is the first time that Malcom X's story has really been tied all together. And again, a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
And there's a lot of amazement in it. But I'd like to go back to start in the early parts of the work that you were doing with your father as a researcher. Did you go right out of the gate with him on this book with this, or how did you develop that relationship?
At the time, this was around 1990 when Dad first interviewed Malcolm's brothers, Wilfred and Filbert. And he was working at Newsday. He wasn't reporting at that time, but he was a managing editor there, meaning he was managing other reporters and covering really important stories of the time. Plus, he had his weekly stint on Sunday Edition that was coming up, I guess, a few years after that. And then, so he was busy. He had other jobs that he was doing. But
Right.
After doing these interviews with the brothers in 1990, he was he's mesmerized by this story. Their story of what their lives were like in childhood and what Malcolm was like as their younger brother, and their relationship with Malcolm over the years and into adulthood. And Dad interviewed them each for the first time for several hours, but also went back to interview them over the course of 5 to 10 years.
No.
And then what grew out of that was the learning about Malcolm. Dad, when I was at that time finishing up teaching my stint as an English teacher in China. And I was visiting during the holidays in 90, so it was the end of 90, early 91. And Dad was just talking about these interviews, and he couldn't stop talking about them. And we were having a conversation one day, and he said that he wanted to write a book about Malcolm. And originally, his whole idea was that he felt before talking with the brothers that we knew all we needed to know about Malcolm. And this is in 1990, so we were only going on the autobiography, his Malcolm speeches, and books about his assassination. And then we also, at that time, somebody else was working on a biography of Malcolm, but it hadn't come out at the time. And Spike Lee was working on his movie, which came out a couple of years after. So it was really brand new information that Dad had at that time. And he just felt that we had an incomplete picture of Malcolm. And over the years, as he was learning more and more about Malcolm through people who worked with Malcolm, who grew up with Malcolm, school with Malcolm, all of that. He worked with him in the nation. He worked with him outside of the nation. His friend Malcolm Jarvis in Boston. What he was learning was that we don't have the complete picture of Malcolm. Malcolm was presented to us fully formed and angry, and in a vacuum, not put in the context of the world he was born into and the world he was living in. And none of us walk through life in a vacuum, including Malcolm.
Right.
We weren't talking about Malcolm's lineage. We weren't talking about his family. He talked about that quickly in his autobiography, but he didn't go into great detail. And even after reading the autobiography, we didn't walk away saying, well, what really was his lineage? And so here was an opportunity to explore that, and also explore what Malcolm was like through the eyes of people who worked with him, who came in contact with him, what their impressions were with them. And it was really just became really fascinating, because this was also somebody Dad admired. He read the autobiography annually, and he played his speeches, for the family growing up. While I was growing up,
Wow.
almost every week. So Dad admired Malcolm, and he was following Malcolm, like when he was encouraged in the 90s, when young people were quoting Malcolm and hearing in rap music lyrics and being quoted from in their interview. And he was really encouraged by the young people picking up Malcolm. And he would write about Malcolm at least annually, at least once in his column at Newsday. And then, but here was an opportunity to learn Malcolm beyond, what people heard in the lecture, in these speeches, and to get a fuller idea of what was so charismatic about him, what drew people to him, but who was he on a personal level, and hence did all this work to learn more about him and his story. We wanted to, and Dad's a journalist,
Right.
So he was focused on telling the most accurate story he could tell, and going where the story took.
So whenever you got to the point where say, okay, this is going to be a book, and this is going to be the whole life, did you sign on to be the researcher at that point?
Yeah, when I came back from China, and that was in summer of '91, he said he was going to do the book. He had set up a relationship with the publishing company, and that he wanted me to work on it with him. And
Fantastic.
I worked on it with him in the beginning, and and I also had other things I was doing too. I mean, I had other jobs. I was working other jobs. There were things I wanted to do, but I did put my grad school ambitions on hold for this project.
Okay.
So this project became my grad school.
Well, fantastic, yeah. And so this would have been in the early 90s?
Yes.
Wow. And did you, and when you started off, did you realize how long this may take to complete the project?
I figured that it would probably take 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
I had seen that when people work on these projects full time, if you look at Taylor Branch and guys, they work on fully engage themselves. It's not a 2 or 3 year endeavor.
Right.
It's at least 10 years.
Right.
We weren't working on this full time. I mean, as I said, Dad was traveling. He was working in news. I mean, he
Right.
was
Yes. Yeah. He had a full-time
we were
other.
running
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, he was doing he was engaged in National Association of Black Journalists. He even
Yeah.
founded the
Yes.
product group during that time, which was focused on um, helping or bringing together Black columnists
Right.
from around the country.
Yes.
And it was like they were they were going to do what NABGA was doing for journalists for Black columnists, because column writing is a different skill,
Right.
different skills.
Right.
So they were working on that together, and and in that process, they got to meet with two presidents. They met with President Clinton as well as President Obama.
Okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. How did you happen to get involved in researching? Is that something that you had? Where did that skill come from?
Well, researching starts off when you're in college. You're writing your term paper.
Right.
You're going to the library. You're learning what sources are. But more importantly, this was me dealing with firsthand sources.
Right.
So finding out who people were. If Dad was talking with the brothers and they mentioned, let's say, a family, a family that they were friendly with in Lansing,
Right.
the next thing would be, how do we get in touch with them?
Right.
And then trying to get in touch with them, trying to
Yeah.
find them. And
Yeah.
if they don't want to talk, trying to convince them that it's a great opportunity to tell their story.
Right. Right.
And so this was all new to me and exciting. And I'm learning from my father, who, well, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the most important journalists in the last
Yes.
25 years of the 20th century.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
I was learning, he was practicing his craft at the top of the game for a long time, and I was learning from him, literally, personally.
How does the research work? How do you go out and get this information and you bring it back? How do you then deliver it to your father, and what kind of way?
Well, it depends. I mean, a lot of times it was conversations, and I would take a lot of notes about conversations I would have people, what they're doing what pre-interviews are. What is this person's role? Who are they? What did they know? When did they know Malcolm? How do they fit into that story? So it's really kind of like an outline type of thing. Talking about that with Dad and saying either this is somebody we were looking for and here's what they told me. And then Dad said, great, I usually will also have their contact info, and then Dad would just step in and do his interview. Or if it was somebody that we would prepare to interview, sometimes he had to figure out, like, okay, we need more research on
Right.
this person. If there was somebody higher up where there's more news articles about and stuff like that. It's like getting as much information as I could get, and also getting secondary, sourcing where you're going through government documents. Like when you're looking at birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, looking at, really kind of things that we have to do in our lives that mark certain events in our lives, but they have to be registered.
Right.
So you have to know how to go to offices to do that. And this is, a lot of college students, we do this, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
a lot of this stuff, I mean, this was different because I actually would have to travel and go to actual, offices. This was
Right.
before they put things online. And soon after they were putting a lot of this online. But or putting in at least microfiche.
Yeah, in the first part, so you had to actually go to these places and sit down. Yeah. You got a whole other story too about that, about how you do all of these things. Fantastic. So you're moving along with the story and finding missing pieces, putting them all together, and.
What was amazing is that because it's my father and I'm his daughter and we trust each other, and we, and it's this thing of like, this is a project, we're not going to share what we have or what we're learning right now, putting it in a book.
Right.
It's not going to help us to have it out, everybody talking about it.
Right.
So, I mean, it's how journalists work.
Yes.
And it's a lonely practice. So, when you're working a story, it's like you're not really doing it in a communal situation,
Right.
right?
Right.
If Dad would always say, if there are two or three journalists in it, there's no story there.
Right.
You have to go somewhere else.
Right. Right. Right.
And so it's really just kind of learning, and how you think about approaching a story or what a story is. So it's just learning about different stories of different people. So yes, we were working on the Malcolm story, but to me, I was also learning about other people's stories. Like I met and became really close with Yuri Fukuyama, who was a Japanese American activist here in Harlem. And she had joined Malcolm. She knew Malcolm. She joined the OAAU. She admired Malcolm, and then she also worked in a lot of other groups in Harlem, and that were dealing with fighting for Black rights, prisoner. I mean, she was huge on the Mumia Abu Jamal movement, and so learning from her and watching her move in the community because she's Japanese, and how are Black people embracing her? And she was about building bridges, and that there were similarities about how her experience in this country, matched up with African American. So she gravitated to that, and she was about fighting for equality for Black people, but also being inclusive of other groups, which included dealing with Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and other groups that came in, other Asian, whether Chinese and Vietnamese. So she was a really interesting person to meet, to work with. I mean, I ended up, working with her a lot, some of the work, and she was just fascinating. Other fascinating people we met was like Vicki Garvin, who died in the 90s, but we interviewed her. She met Malcolm in Ghana, but she also saw Malcolm speak on 125th Street when she worked for the Union. And she was into organizing labor unions here in New
Right.
York City. And this is in the end of the 50s, early 60s. And then she ended up going to Ghana. And then after being in Ghana, she went to China.
Right.
So that
Wow.
was a really experience, correlation for me because I had just come back from China. And we were
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about,
Yes. Yes.
we got to talk a little bit about what our experiences were like. And that's a fascinating story too. Some of the men that, Malcolm was. I mean, we also met with James Oz, who was known by other names. James 67X is what he was known in the nation. And then when I met him, he was Abdul Razak. And it's just how he moved from all these, identities to. It was really interesting. Or even meeting when I met Lukman Anas, who was ordered by the Nation of Islam to put a firebomb in Malcolm's car,
Wow.
and he didn't like that
Wow.
idea, and he ended up leaving the nation because of that. He says, "Look, it's one thing to not like Malcolm, disagree with him, but to treat him like that and not give him a fair defense of what he did or for his actions,
Right.
he felt that Malcolm was treated unfairly, so he ended up leaving
Wow.
and being part of Malcolm's security team after Malcolm split the nation." So these are all really interesting people who have interesting stories in their own identity, and just learning about that and learning what was intriguing about this and how you might put. I found all of this interesting, and this is what we were doing. And then to me, Dad would just share with me the craft of just putting together a story, even about writing. Dad was a masterful writer,
Right.
and we used to we would talk about writing even. Like he would talk about Mencken, and he would read why he liked Mencken, and I was just like, I don't like Mencken, but I would listen to why my father liked him,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I would talk to him about people that I had admired as writers, and we really vibed on
Fantastic. Yes. Uh, as you're talking with these various people and it's beginning to fill something out, at what point did you decide that the book would be in these like sections that, and I think you have 4 sections covering different parts of Malcolm's life. Did that come together as you began to get information, or did you already have that in mind and you were trying to fill it in?
No, that comes later. I mean, Dad had an idea in the beginning of what the book was going to look like when he first started on the book, and then as he got more information, it would change. Like when he would do the split, and then the Malcolm and Martin chapter, for example, he was always concerned about the length of this book. He didn't even want it to be as long as it is.
Right.
It's like just short of a doorstopper, as he would call it.
Right.
And he really didn't want this to be this long. He knew that people weren't really into reading long books, but he wanted people to read it, and he knew that it was going to be interesting enough to read, but he really just didn't want it. And he was really struggling with the size of the book. And I said, well, it may be 2 volumes, Dad. There are different ways of doing this. So, but he had an idea already set in place of how it's going to be, but it would change based on how much information he gained.
Right.
And for example, when you look at Hartford, he was excited by Hartford just simply because he grew up in Hartford and he knew Hartford very well. But then what he's finding when he's interviewing people who were part of that temple that Malcolm organized, their stories with Malcolm really showed what Malcolm was like interacting with them as a leader, as a minister, without the other energies of the nation, where you have other people. He had the permission of Elijah Muhammad to organize that temple, but it was like people weren't checking in on him all the time. Whereas in Boston, there's a hierarchy. In Pennsylvania, and when he was in Philadelphia, there's a larger contingent of other people there. But Hartford, it was small, and he was the person that was working with these people in Hartford. So we get to really see Malcolm organize on his own, kind of unchecked. I mean, and under the tenets of the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad's teaching, but also really what he wanted to instill in the people as far as being independent and building their own businesses, not accepting welfare, and then also how to move them from. Most of those people came from the South, and it was Jim Crow South, and most of them had dealt with lynchings. Either they had witnessed it, or some of them were actually going to be lynched, and they escaped. And so it was dealing with the trauma of that, because we're traumatized. If you see a lynching or somebody that was lynched, I mean, that it's like knowing somebody who was murdered, right? I mean, you're traumatized by that, whether you saw it or not. And so he was working with them on how to move beyond that and still be working and healthy people minded and healthy Black minded.
Right. Fascinating. You were mentioning the size of the book, but the way that you put it together, it takes away from because it's in these separate sections, and it feels like more like volume than a long book. In other words, it's not a book that you just go from page 1 to the room.
Well, the section portion, it was always kind of that way. The design of it, I would say a lot of that comes also with dealing with the publisher, and they're talking about how to, do section breaks and stuff like that. That's what the publisher was. But Dad's idea of how the chapters would be, and he knew that, okay, these chapters are going to be about this part of his life, and these chapters are about that part of his life. He knew that.
Right.
He knew how many chapters was going to be.
Okay.
And that, but the thing is, when you're doing an outline, you just kind of fill out as you're working on it. What he found is that some of these chapters would become unwieldy. So you'll see Hartford chapter was a lot of what you see in Martin and Malcolm in the media is also part of Hartford chapter, originally.
Right.
But we broke it up.
Right. Fantastic. So as you're moving along, at some point, do you begin to wonder when you're going to be able to turn the corner and get on the lane where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel?
I don't. Yeah. Yeah. And we would have conversations about that, and sometimes we would, as I said, we weren't full time on this book all the time.
Right, right.
So we lived life. I mean, we
Yeah,
did our things.
yeah,
I worked in real estate.
yeah,
I at a bank. I traveled.
right.
I took people to China in the
Yeah,
meantime.
yeah,
Dad was doing all of his jobs.
right.
So we were still working on this, and we knew it was going to have to be finished. But I what happened in 2016, I was laid off from my job, and my dad said, "We're going to finish the book," and I said, "Fine." So I was working on that with him, from 2016. Then he died in 2018 suddenly, and then it was, and it was pretty much like right at that finishing line, and he was going to do his editing, and that's what he was already in the process of doing, was editing.
Uh,
And
but
but when he passed away, it was like, I have to pick it up. And also, I mean, I was in charge of doing the end note, so all of the documentation of where this information comes from. I mean, I was putting all that together, and that's what I was spending a lot of my time during these last years, just making sure I had all of that.
when your father died and it was so unexpected, did you know right away that you were not going, that the book was going to be completed? Did you know, make that commitment
Oh,
immediately?
it was a foregone conclusion as far as I was. It was going to be finished. It wasn't a question.
Yeah,
Um,
I was stunned, in part because your father, he looked like the picture of health. You saw strong, big. Uh, how do you get past grief to go and do what you have to do? How are you, or do you carry that with you, or how does that work?
and I think people deal with grief, or people grieve differently. This was a unique situation, because I knew that this was my dad's life's work. That's what he was calling it. And so this was a huge responsibility to make sure that it would be published, and published in his voice. And that's what I was focusing. So I kind of had it with me all this time, and there were times when it was hard to get out of bed,
Yeah,
but my goal and my focus really was on making sure that this would be published, and it would be his voice, and it would be the most accurate story that he had put together.
fantastic. I just want to go back. Sometimes you're working on a project for a long time. People say, "Well, why is it taking them so long?" Why? And what get lost is that, yeah, but we're not just get up every morning and just doing this. You have all these other pieces in your life that also have to fit into it. But the fact that you were able to stay with it the way that you did, kept your eye right on the prize, and you were in this period where you were gathering so much information, it was probably settled a long time ago that this was going to be a 600-page book, because you had so much that you were digging up and putting together.
As I said, Dad really wanted to not be this long. But I said, you can't tell the story without this information. I mean, it has to go in there. And he was trying to figure out, sometimes, do you take something out? Do you leave it in? And I was like, it has to be for the story.
But this is also the story of an era too. I mean, if you read this, it goes so many different places that it has to be. It is a big book and a big project.
What's unique about this, and it's really important to understand this about Dad. I mean, Dad, he was born in Jim Crow South. His family moved up to Hartford. He served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam. He worked in journalism, 38 years, at the top of the field. He worked in every aspect of it. He was a minority affairs reporter. He was, investigative reporter here in on this side of the country. But then he also did foreign journalism.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and he actually traveled to talk to people in Africa
Right.
who were there with Malcolm. He met with Dr. Lee, who at the time Dr. Lee's wife had died. But he was living in Kenya at the time. But Dad met with him and learned about what that relationship was like with Malcolm when he visited in Ghana. And he, like I said, he traveled abroad to meet with people who knew Malcolm while he was there. So it was very exhaustive what Dad was doing.
Yeah.
But Dad was a journalist to the core, as you know.
Right.
You guys talked about it all the time. You guys would hang and over the years, and
I am always
about
amazed at how much he could do. I mean, you mentioned the black journalists and the development of it and the Trotter Group, but he found time all through this to bring that journalistic community together. And also, you brought it into your home. I mean, you would have groups of journalists. I mean, it'd be nothing to have 50 journalists in your house. And it was really something. But your life was also changing. You started the book, you were living on Long Island, right?
Yeah, I was living on Long Island. Then I moved into Harlem.
Right. What year did you come into Harlem?
I think it was 93 finally.
Okay, yeah. And you didn't just come into Harlem, but you guys took this great house and just...
Well, I lived in the house, and it's the story of Brownstone. Right?
Yes, and I remember when you were living there.
Renovated.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So and those are long projects too. So that's a whole nother story.
But this was also happening while you were doing the book. Yeah. So you go, and then you're getting to a point where all of these things are coming together, and you can look around the corner and see the light. And then you lose your father. And you have to, did that stop the work for a while until you, how much of a stop was in there, or was there no stop?
There was no stop.
You kept going.
For me, I kept going. We were so close, and like I say, we were tying up loose ends, and he was editing, and he had already sent chapters already to the publisher, and they were being edited. So, that's where he was in. That was the stage. And we were tying up, and I was looking at doing the end notes. So that was that last stage that we were going to do together. And I was really looking forward to see how a project like this wraps up. Because, on the one hand, it's like you can look at it as being an apprentice, but at every level, you're gaining skills and you're becoming an expert at it. You're perfecting your own skills. That's what was happening for me. So I just stepped into the void and said, okay, what needs to be done? I know where we are. I know what this is supposed to look like. I know what my father's intentions are. What needs to be finished up?
Fantastic.
And that's what I had to do.
You have a lot of confidence. I can see it. But another thing that gets lost is you weren't just walking out of nowhere. You had a whole body of experience yourself that you were bringing to the project. So there was a substantial foundation there.
Yeah, I try to explain it as me and my father were close. My father was close with me and all my brothers. My father's about family.
Right.
So we all have very close relationships with him. And as you know, we were very involved with his career. He would talk about the career with us all the time. He would talk about the condition of Black people throughout our lives. and what he experienced, and even with my mom. So both of my parents, they were very focused on making sure that we were independent thinkers, but understood our situation. And so they want us to be confident in who we are as Black people, and and don't don't be a victim to the racism. Like, understand how. I mean, you know how Dad worked. I
Right,
mean,
right.
he was not a victim to racism. Did it exist? Yes. Does it hold us back? Yes. But does it stop us from doing what we want to do?
Uh,
Not if we're really determined to do it.
yeah. I do know you have a very strong family, and that means so very much to carry you forward. No matter what, you're going to move
And
forward.
and let me say that my family is very integral in helping me finish the book. I mean, I didn't just finish it on my own.
Right,
I mean, having their support, and they too wanted to see this book finished, and and also allowing me to just stay focused on this full time for these last 2 years. So having family support is really important. But what's also parallel to about my story and my family, and Dad's story and his family, is also parallel with Malcolm's story that we tell about his family.
wow. Yes, yes. I can see the connection. Yes, yes, yes. It's been wonderful for you to share so much of this with us. While I knew that you guys were doing all this, you have to be in it to really understand all that's involved. I imagine you must still have regular conversations with your father.
He's never far away.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you.
But I mean, a lot of people still, I still hear from people who worked with him or worked under him, and they still tell me like he's the best boss they ever had. I'm talking about journalists, real big time journalists, Pulitzer Prize winners, and they
Yeah.
say they miss him.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
he was so, you know, as a boss, he just knew how, and I'm talking even as his employee, he knew how to get us to work at our highest and best quality work and to put that out. And you need a good manager to do that, and Dad was definitely that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He did so many things and did them all well, so well. As a matter of fact, I was reading something that you'd written, and you mentioned about a television show he did in New York. He
Sunday.
excelled. He excelled at that show. I always
Yeah.
said the only problem with this show was he was too good. They said we can't have this. And of course, on a very personal way, he and I were on the radio a lot together, and he was so fantastic on the radio. Oh,
Yeah.
he had just a multi-talented human being and did so many things. And
Yeah, but he loved people. He loved groups. He was community oriented. And the
yeah,
community wasn't, it wasn't just whether you're talking about your family
right,
or you're in the newsroom, there's that community. Um, he wanted the craft of journalism to be practiced by everybody at the highest level. And he
right,
really to do their best job. And he was family oriented. His best friend was his oldest brother,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and who was also very key in helping us do the Hartford chapter because he knew
yeah.
those people.
And
And
he used to look out for senior people. I remember when he had a great friendship with Clayton Riley, and Clayton had gotten
yeah.
sick, and he just would find time to got to go spend time with Clayton. He was able to pack a lot into the time that he had, and I guess at the end of the deal, that's the key thing. Use the time that you've got. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tami, it's been so wonderful for you to share, to use the time that you've had, so much of your time you have today to share it with us. I wish you well. One other thing, though, this book has already gotten a lot of acclaim. and it's just really being introduced. When I went to the store to get a copy of it, I said, "Well, we got one left."
Great news.
All of this thing now that you're getting your feet wet in, the whole thing about having a big book, how is that impacting your life on a day-to-day basis now?
I'm doing a lot of interviews.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it gives me a chance. I mean, honestly, it's bittersweet because Dad would have loved this part of the process.
Yeah.
Love connecting with people, as you know.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, as you were talking about how he was with Clayton Riley, who worked for the New York Times and also WPAI, but you know, Clayton was also like he has so many stories to tell, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that they worked together. But he loved connecting with people. He loved talking to you.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, you know,
Right.
remember what I said to you when I last saw you? It was like, you know, don't let too much time without me seeing you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Because
Yes.
Dad was the only person that could get you to come out sometime.
Yeah.
And I said, he's not here. What's the trick?
Well, listen, I don't know. You're in New York, and so now you also have a big house, but the pandemic has really struck a mighty blow in New York. There's two sides to it. I mean, New York was hit hard, but New York rolled with that punch and had gotten things. I remember when they looking in the paper, they said they were down to 0 infections, and now it seems like another wave is coming at the city.
But, all right. Watching this virus as it started, we saw that it was going to travel in a wave. Wherever it was kind of like wherever people who were in the area that it started from would go to. So if you look at their travel patterns, that's basically where the virus is going to go. That's why I remember watching how China had shut down travel during their Spring Festival.
Right.
And they did that because they were trying to stop travel. But meanwhile, people had already left. You know, people had gone to Europe, they had gone to the United States, they had gone to wherever, they went to other parts of Asia. And it's like, if you look at that map in the earliest phases of this spread, you can see where it hit. And so we knew by watching it, I mean, at least I did, just kind of watching it, that this was going to be a wave. So once it hit New York and therefore the East Coast, and it hit, I think it hit the West Coast too, right around the same time, because it's the travel pattern in Canada. You knew it wasn't going to stop with us.
Right. Right.
Because people travel.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Yes.
And so what we were fortunate in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut was that we had governors in place who, you know, who were thinking about their constituents, really. And they cared about what was going on. And they had to learn, you know, as this thing was happening. There were mistakes, you know, made. They try to correct, you know, but they were very active, you know, and they were very involved. They didn't say, you know, oh, it's the local county's responsibility, as you know, the federal government said.
Right.
The federal government said it's a state's issue, and they said that why? Because these were blue states, right? And that wasn't their concern. But then it grew to the red states. Yeah. And they're still active, you know. But the thing is that we learned lessons in the New York, Jersey, and Connecticut state areas. You know how this was going to grow. You know what were the phases. They knew that they wanted to level off. They talked about that early on. They said the numbers are going to rise, but we just got to figure out how we're going to flatten the curve. And they were very involved with it. So, and they also said at that time that while we do this now, this is in the spring going into the summer, that when the weather gets cold, it will spike again. Right. And so this is not news. Right. To me, I mean, this is not new. We knew that this is part of the story. Whether people are focusing on it or not, this is part of the whole story of looking at the virus. And so when cold weather, you have to take precautions. And and then the other thing is with it being airborne,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and once it's airborne, that's when it becomes really scary. But I also advise people, look at what happened 100 years ago with the Spanish.
Well, you've made history here because you've shown how do you introduce America to a book at a time when we're all sort of homebound in a pandemic, but you found a way to use the technology. Although I would say you are a child of the technology too. It's all developed during your years, and now this fits you right like a glove. And when this is over, you've got these great trips you go, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want you to come out and talk to them once we can get back to that crowds aspect.
Yeah, it's a concern because we're social beings,
Yes.
and not being able to socialize
Oh.
is problematic.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, I think that's why we see people, who say, "I'm not wearing the mask anymore."
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I'm going to be defiant. I'm going to go to the restaurant.
Yeah. Right.
Eat inside.
Right.
I'm going to be revolutionary and eat inside.
Absolutely. Yes.
But at the same time, Ben Carson has caught COVID. Now, Herman Cain died from COVID by being defiant.
Right. Right.
I don't know how Ben Carson caught it, but Herman Cain, a cancer survivor and other,
Yeah.
health issues, went ahead to that Tulsa rally
Yeah. Yeah.
and tested positive with
Yeah.
a bunch of people, and he did not survive.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I just wish that people would be, more concerned about that and put more value on that,
Right.
on their
Yeah.
lives and their families' lives, their friends' lives.
Yes. Yeah.
Herman Cain is no longer here, and it's sad.
Yes. Yes.
And unfortunately, the people that he was supporting to and being defiant with never mentioned his name.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Tami, listen, it's been so wonderful to sit down with you. And
Thanks
so
for having me, Earl.
I think I know all the business, but there's so many things that you talked about this afternoon, all news to me. I look forward to the time when I'll be able to catch up with you
Thanks.
again in New York City.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Earl.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. You're fantastic. And congratulations.
Thank you.
The Dead Are Arising, The Life of Malcom X. The book by Les and Tami Payne is available from booksellers everywhere.